What's up, everybody? My name is Dave.
And I am Gene.
And welcome to What Is This Podcast?
Yo.
Which is a podcast where we try to figure out what this podcast is.
Yeah,
Essentially.
we literally don't know what this podcast is about, you know.
Right.
And I think that's kind of cool, right? Because we're kind of treating this like a startup, and our early adopters are essentially going to determine what kind of podcast this is going to be. So,
or ever. I mean, maybe we'll never decide what this podcast is.
That's kind of cool, man. I kind of like that idea. I mean, is there a podcast like that? I mean, is there a podcast about nothing? As you said the other day, the Jerry Seinfeld or the Seinfeld of podcasts?
I don't think there is. And it's like it's like a podcast where we're about everything and we're about nothing at the same time. Like any week we can be about whatever we want to be about.
Such is life.
Right. Yeah, it's constantly evolving, constantly falling apart.
Right. And who wants to be pigeonholed, into this idea of a podcast or a theme? You know what I mean? Like, I am such a scattered brain individual that like it's really hard for me to focus on one thing for a long period of time.
Right. And the same with me. It's like, my ADHD mind can't sit still for 15 seconds. Like, I'm like a fucking goldfish. So why not make a podcast that represents, we are the podcast for the ADHD generation.
So come on along and hitch on to this ride.
It's like we have ADP, attention deficit podcasts.
There you go. That's what this podcast is about.
Maybe, but so what's our? I think something maybe we should talk about is what's our release schedule. Are we a monthly podcast? Are we a weekly podcast? Are we a bi-weekly podcast? Are we a daily podcast?
I would love to be a daily podcast, but that's only going to happen if this pays us.
Right.
But I think we should aim for weekly. You know what I mean? I think that's kind of standard. That's YouTube standard. And if we want to see any kind of, sustainable growth, we're going to have to be consistent.
Right. Absolutely. And a week to week basis. And, so I think when we were talking initially about what this podcast could be, you came up with a good idea that I think would be interesting to try at some point. And it would be to go down the list of podcast subjects.
Yeah.
And maybe like one episode a month, we try to be a different podcast.
Like you mean maybe one theme a month? Yeah. Yep.
Well, sure. Do we want the theme to be the whole month, or do we want the theme to just be like 1 week? Like, and that's the thing, is like, it's so open-ended. It's like, do we make theme months? Do we have weeks where we literally just show up and we just talk about literally nothing? Like we just have a conversation? Or,
and I think for this podcast, and I think for any podcast, I think we should really lean on the feedback. Mm-hmm. Of our audience, you know what I mean? And I think part of the appeal of doing this is this idea of letting the audience kind of guide our journey.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's probably going to be 5 people that's going to listen to this podcast, so we'll let those 5 individuals figure out what we do next.
Right. Yeah. You as the audience have all of the power, which is terrifying.
That's terrifying.
Because there are some sick individuals out on the internet.
Yeah.
But hey, fuck it.
Why not, right? What do we have to lose?
Exactly.
Other than our mental health.
Right. I mean, at the same time, it's like we can still be like, if someone throws something completely wild at us and we're just like, we definitely know we don't want to be that kind of a podcast. Yeah. We can always say no.
Yeah. I mean,
we should never.
Like, I don't want to do like a BDSM podcast. That doesn't interest me.
No, not for like, an
hour. Unless we talk about specifically nipple clamps.
Okay, but it has to. So BDSM only if we talk about a very specific aspect of. Okay.
Yeah, and the history of nipple clamps and how they evolved and improved over time.
Okay, but then that's not a BDSM podcast. That's just the history of nipple clamps. Yeah, it's kind of an engineering podcast.
But don't they kind of go hand in hand, right? I mean,
what, engineering and BDSM?
No, BDSM and nipple clamps, right? I mean, that's kind of like,
absolutely,
you know.
But then you could also say that BDSM and engineering do go hand in hand, because you have to creatively come up with and engineer constructs to inflict pain upon other people, right?
I mean, you say that so eloquently.
Fuck it. Well, yeah. So this can be a art to that if you're into it. I don't know. It's not a realm I'm very familiar with, or am I? I don't know. You don't know my life.
I do not know your life, so God bless you. More the power to you. God bless your wife.
Yes, and for her listening, I guess I'm sorry.
She's gonna be mortified.
Yeah, and yep. Well, I probably said worse things than that to her, so
I'm sure.
But at that, there you go, right there. That's so, yeah. So feedback, and I
know for me specifically, my goals for this podcast, I mean, obviously it would be nice if we were able to monetize this thing and, have it kind of be one of the side hustles. If not one of the main hustles, that'd be fantastic. But like, honestly, like improving upon my conversational skills is very important to me, and I've mentioned this author to you, Celeste Headley. Definitely, guys, check her out. She has a few books out there, but the one that I'm familiar with is called Let's Talk. And it's basically a book on conversation and how terrible we are at it here in the West. And it's very eye-opening. And it's eye-opening in the fact that, we are a lot worse at conversations than we think we are. And B, the fact that we're not good at conversations could potentially be one of the reasons why we are currently in a ideological war in this country.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The fact that we are unable to talk to each other, we're just talking at each other and talking over each other, so there are a lot of great tips that she has. The one that I'm trying to work on, and I think this podcast is perfect for this, is like actually listening to you, right? Because we all have this habit of half-ass listening to the individual while kind of formulating our response and just waiting for us to make that. And that's, active listening is half of a conversation. You know what I mean? And if you can't do that well, then you've already failed.
Right. Because we are a very reactionary culture. And that's like you've said, it's just that, like, nobody's really listening. Everybody's just waiting to respond.
That's it.
And it's like if like you're watching a movie, like you can tell a bad actor because the dialogue isn't conversational. It's like you can tell that person's just waiting to say their line. They're not reacting to what the other person is saying. They're just saying their dialogue, and that's it.
Interesting. That's not something that's ever really occurred to me. But now that you mentioned, that's probably something I'll probably look out for. That's interesting.
It's like, because it feels stilted, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, because you're not, if you're not listening to the person, you're not actually in the moment with that other person. You're just in your head.
You know what reminds me of that? And this is probably like blasphemy for a lot of people, but Keanu Reeves kind of gives me that vibe. He's not a great actor. I'm sorry, guys. He's not a great actor.
No, I would say he's just bad at delivering. He just sounds wooden.
Yeah, he's stiff.
Yeah.
It's kind of stiff.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, he can kill a motherfucker 3 ways to Sunday, and it's great. But you're right. Like, and actually, I got into that debate with somebody once when John Wick came out. I was like, his acting still isn't great, and they were like, no, it's awesome. It's his acting, and it's like, no, his line readings are still terrible. Like, yeah, I guess I'm back. It's like that doesn't sound. No, shut up.
Like,
just shut up and shoot people.
Like, Keanu Reeves never like moved me. You know what I mean? Like,
and I love Keanu Reeves.
Yeah, I do too. But he's never had a moving performance.
No,
I mean, Bill
or Ted. I can't remember which one he was.
I mean, I was like,
that moved me when I was a child.
Exactly, I was 10. You know what I mean? Like,
no, but even like The Matrix. Like The Matrix is a moving movie, but he wasn't really.
Well, that's the thing. Like, it's like, you know, like it's the movie,
right? And it's more Morpheus. Like Morpheus is the real like. Fishburne is the one you latch onto more in that movie in terms of acting, in my opinion.
Interesting, because his performance was incredible in that movie. I mean, he's a cool motherfucker, that Morpheus.
Right. But no, I definitely see what you're saying. I'm not sure it totally, because I don't think Keanu Reeves definitely strikes me as a person who is present in what he is doing. He's just not good at delivering lines.
Yeah, I'm sure he works hard. You know what I mean? I'm sure he shows up. So I know he's a consummate professional. You know what I mean? I'm sure he shows up, knows his lines.
And that's the thing. From what I've heard, he is a super like professional when it comes to doing everything. Like,
and you got to respect that. You know,
right? But I totally see what you're saying, and we're just bad because I think we don't have conversations with each other anymore. We have debates.
Mm-hmm.
We've become an argumentative culture, where it's like it doesn't matter if what you're saying is right. I'm right, and I'm going to make you see why I'm right, and I don't really care what you have to say about it.
Yeah, you know, and it's not, you know, it's come to the point where it's not even about being right or truth. It's really about who can deliver the stronger argument, right?
Yes.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're right. You know what I mean? It just means that you're a better debater.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And what does that mean to be a better debater? Like, that's the sad thing is like, even if you're wrong, as long as you can argue your point better, you're still going to win. And that's kind of fucked up.
Well, I mean, that's kind of like I think what you just said was the key word. You know, you're still going to win. You know, it's a competition. You know what I mean? It's not a dialogue, right? The point of a dialogue is to, you know, find some kind of common ground when you have, you know what I mean? That's kind of like the utility you get from a good conversation, right? Learning something from the other individual and finding some kind of common ground. And like, we have no interest in doing that. You know, it's all a competition. It's all about winning. And, it's just, you know, I'm afraid that, you know, we have done, you know, irreparable damage to the fabric of our culture, and you know, we've gotten to a point where, you know, our differences are irreconcilable. You know what I mean? That's scary.
It's terrifying because that's it. Once you get to that point, that's the end.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Is there coming back from this? But do you think that this is an American problem, or do you think this is a worldwide problem? Like, what do you think because like the internet has really brought about, you know, when everybody has a voice.
Yep.
Can you really hear anybody?
No, it's a lot of noise out there, dude.
And like when everybody's trying to win, so is it inherently America? Because America is all about competition. We've always been about competition.
Sure.
But like if you go to other countries, is it the same sort of fractured?
Well, there definitely is a global wide rise in nationalism.
Yes.
Right. And I think that is a product of the internet, you know, and, you know, just because the internet has, you know, ironically made the world smaller, you know, I kind of feel like people, for whatever reason, feel like they are losing their identity, right?
Which is understandable.
Sure. And humans inherently just don't like change. But is it inevitable? Like, I kind of see all these changes, like, and you know, do I like the idea that, you know, the concept of privacy doesn't exist anymore? No, I don't like the idea at all, but I accept it because, you know, it's a wave that I can't stop. You know what I mean? Like,
we also allowed that to happen, which is why I think it's funny that people can, like, when people start being like, well, like, not to get super political, but or political at all, but like, so vaccines, like when people are like, they're going to use the vaccine to control you, to track you. It's like, dude, do you have a phone?
Yeah,
Like, have you ever
100%.
logged into the internet? Do you have a television? Because they
Sure.
know where you are.
Exactly.
Like, so
If
don't, if that's your argument, like there's reasons, I guess, to not get a vaccine. And that's a different conversation, whatever. But I think that's the dumbest reason.
No, I agree. No, I agree. Let me ask you this. All right. You are somebody that values their privacy, right? You
Yeah.
strike me as a very private individual, right?
Yes, I wasn't always like that. Like I used
Yeah.
to be a lot more open when I was
Sure.
younger, but as I've
Sure.
gotten older, I've sort of
Well, time
built
has a
some
way of
walls.
yeah, well, time has a way of hardening you, right?
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
that's not surprising at all. But so let me ask you this. If you can ensure that you can comfortably maintain your privacy, kind of like pre-web 2.0,
Mhm.
um, would you give up all like the technological wonders that we're currently kind of experiencing and living in right now? Like, would you give all this up?
That's a very, very difficult question. Um, all of the technological wonders? No.
Well, anything that I mean, you kind of have to. If it's if
Social
it's
media? Sure. Yeah, I'll give social media up.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, but we come from a world where social media didn't exist. Like I
yeah,
remember what that world was. I
sure.
remember when like I'll like calling people on a landline.
Yeah, but when you shoot up that first hit of heroin, you know what I mean? Yeah, you remember a world without the heroin,
No,
but
but
once in
I deleted Facebook at the beginning of the pandemic. I deleted Facebook for a few months. Just I
okay,
just could not fucking handle it.
sure, sure.
And after a few days, I didn't care like anymore.
But you still on YouTube watching random videos, going down a rabbit
Yeah,
hole.
but to me, that's watching television. You know what I mean?
Okay. But that still kind of involves like your privacy, right? Because they're still kind of tracking you. The
Yeah,
devices that you're on that, in order to use it, you know what I
sure.
mean? Like,
And so that's the thing. It's like I guess if I had some, and see, it's just a very hard question because we're so comfortable because technology is everything now. It's in everything.
yeah.
So I think to sort of like if technology were to just go away, we would all lose our minds.
Yeah.
Because it's everything. It's
Well,
our whole way of life at this point. Like the
mhm.
internet is our entire way of life.
Yeah. I mean, it's how we interface with reality, right?
Right. Now, and I mean, with social media, like even when I use Facebook and stuff, like I share memes and like
Sure.
sometimes I'll make an opinion about like a television show or a
Yep.
movie or some music and stuff.
Yeah.
But I'm not really very personal with my use of social media. Whereas
Sure.
like I don't put my son on social media a lot.
Yeah.
And some people do, and like that's for them, but I don't feel comfortable
Yeah.
having his face just plastered all over the internet.
It's kind of weird. I always thought that was kind of weird.
Yeah. It is, but I get like, some people just like to share every aspect of their lives. And it's weird because I know some like people who would call themselves introverts, but then they're sharing everything that they do on the internet. And it's like that's a pretty extroverted thing. But yeah,
Yeah.
I get it because you're doing it from sort of a distance.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
I get that, but it's just
Exactly.
sort of funny because it's still sort of a contradiction
Sure.
where like you're constantly putting your voice out there and your life out there. But if we were to see you in public, it wouldn't. And again, it's because there's that disconnect with the
Yeah.
screen comes the disconnect. But
And it's a controlled environment. I mean, me being I am an introvert, and it's obviously a lot easier to kind of put yourself out there if you're doing it in the safety of your own home by yourself. You know what I
sure,
mean?
but it's still sort of like you're still being very public about
Yeah.
your
I
and that's like it's like posting pictures of I don't know, like posting pictures of your children. To me, that's I don't begrudge anybody that does do that. It's just
Sure.
I don't
It's
I
not your
don't like
thing.
that.
It's not your thing.
No, and like every once in a while, like it's fine. Like when he has like a milestone, I'll throw up some pictures of him. But it's also like I know enough people who it's like they don't like, in my head it's like, why do you fucking care what my kid is doing right now? Like,
Yeah,
why
but
do you need to see that he took a shit this morning? You know what I mean?
well, and a lot of these parents aren't doing it for their, their friends or their audience. They're doing it for them. They're posting it for them. You know what I mean?
Right. But and I guess I just don't understand that, because it's like, why are you like, why don't you just make an album on your phone of photos, or like if you're doing it for you, why do you have to do it publicly? I guess it's just not something I understand. But again, it sounds like I'm judging people, but I'm not, because at the end of the day, I don't care.
No, you're just explaining your kind of, the reason why you don't think it's necessary in your life. And that's understandable, and I don't have any kids, and that, but if I did, I probably feel the same way. I don't see myself plastering my kid's face all over the place.
Right. Like I don't plaster my face all over the internet.
Yeah.
So,
same.
and like my wife is like just not about like social media at all.
Sure.
She has no social media presence.
Good for her.
You know about. And so that's kind of interesting, how we're like, because we sort of are the two opposite ends of the spectrum, where I am on social media a lot, but reading it.
Sure.
And she's never on it. But what about you? Like if you could ensure your privacy 100%, would you give all of this up? It's a hard question.
I guess I'm kind of echoing you. It's a complicated question, right?
Right.
But I would say, like my gut says no. Because I don't mean to answer a question with another question, but
sometimes that's inevitable.
Don't you kind of feel like the fact that there's a lot less privacy, and the world has just overall become a lot more transparent, do you feel like that's going to correct a lot of human behavior? Because you're constantly being watched, right? Like I am now less apt, like, for example, I was driving around the city of Boston like 1 o'clock in the morning last night, right? And there are parts of the city where there's nobody around, right? So if there's a red light, I'll just run right through it. You typically,
of course.
But now that there are cameras pretty much in every major intersection, do I want to get a surprise ticket in the mail for running a red light? So, that's an example of corrective behavior.
Sure.
Because of, the, I don't know, lack of privacy is the words, but you know what I mean?
No, I know exactly what you mean. And I think you're right, and that will happen, but I think that's going to take time. That's going to take, it's going to be a while, because like you said, people hate change. And the minute you sort of are placing these restrictions on people, that even if they're not aware of that, they're sort of like, just subtle restrictions, it's going to take a while. And the minute people start to notice that that's what's happening, people will bristle against that.
Sure.
But I think in the long run, I think there's shit that will sort of correct itself. But it'll take time. I guess that's what I think. Like it'll take a little while.
I know what you mean, but will it? Because time is moving. The pace at which time is moving now versus 1999 are two totally different worlds, man. Like imagine, just think of like the world 4 years ago, pre-Donald Trump. It's a totally different world right now.
Yeah. Actually, I have a good analogy for just that specific thing. Is this writer I like called Chuck Klosterman was talking about Back to the Future, and it was like it was an anniversary of Back to the Future, and he was saying how in the movie Back to the Future, Michael J. Fox, when he's in the past, plays Johnny Be Good, and he says, "This is an oldie where I come from, but you guys haven't heard it or whatever." And then when Chuck Lusserman was writing about this article, the same amount of time had passed between Johnny Be Good and Back to the Future that had passed between Back to the Future and when he was writing the article. And he was saying that we don't think of Back to the Future as being an oldie. It still feels like a current thing. Like it still feels pretty, it's not super dated yet or anything. Whereas like in 1985, Johnny Be Good was already dated.
Okay, that's interesting.
Where it's, and because time is moving so much sort of quicker and in a smaller space.
Yeah.
That like, you know, like Nirvana is technically classic rock.
Can you imagine?
But it does not feel like classic rock. Like Nevermind still feels like a modern album. It doesn't feel like an album that came out 30 something years ago.
I would argue that like in the 90s, you know, if an adult, you know, heard the song Saturday Night Fever,
sure,
you know, that at that point in the 90s, you know, depending on which end of the decade you are, like, I mean, that song was 25 years old at that point, right? It came out in the 70s.
Right.
And it was on oldies. I would imagine to them it didn't feel old because it's kind of like the soundtrack of their youth.
Sure. Right? But I would argue like something like because kids still listen to Nirvana.
Yeah.
But like we weren't listening to Saturday Night Fever in the 90s. Like our parents were, but us as kids weren't listening to that music.
Now, do you think
but like Kurt Cobain is still an icon. We didn't give a fuck about the Bee Gees at that point. Like now I care about the Bee Gees.
Sure. Yeah, well, I mean, like, I think a part of that has to do with the fact that music is essentially free, right? Where back then you actually purchase a physical product, in order to get into an artist. Where now you can just stream it online, you know. So I think that's probably a factor as well.
Oh yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
But it still feels like, you know, it just feels. I don't know, but it's just to your point, like everything's moving faster, but things still feel like, I don't know, it's time is just a contradiction. But you're right, like the world is different.
So much different. You know, but like
in the last 4 years, we've also lived like an insane amount of history.
Is that part of the kind of acceleration of the perceived acceleration of time? You know what I mean?
Could be, yeah.
If that's the case, because if this year is anything like 2020, fuck me. You know, like I'm exhausted.
Right. It doesn't feel like it so far. It hasn't been great. But like by this point in 2020, we'd had potential nuclear Armageddon. Half of the world was on fire.
Right.
Like a lot of shit had happened before the pandemic even started.
Yeah, no, you're right.
Tons of shit had happened. So far this year,
it's only been a coup or an attempted coup.
Yeah, so there's been a major American struggle this year. And outside of that, like, because like all that other shit was like a worldwide, like nuclear Armageddon affects everybody. Like the Amazon in Australia burning to the ground affects everybody.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely shit going on right now. We're just not aware of it because we're Americans. We don't care.
Right. But I would say like so far we're off to sort of like globally a bit, you know, like the pandemic is still raging, depending on who you talk to.
Sure.
But that's kind of it. Like impeachment is over, the coup is over. That's all behind us now.
What's next?
Now it's just whatever. Yeah, and like I don't really want to know what's next, but you know, nothing could be next at the same time.
Yeah.
We could get a few months of just COVID. Whereas like in the summer, like 2020, like because it was, you know, again, it was nuclear Armageddon, the world on fire, the pandemic happens, social justice rages in the middle of the summer. Like everything, like the country was ripping itself apart.
Yeah.
You know, 2020 was the longest year ever. It was 10 years in a year.
You know, what's funny? You know, on January 1st, my cousin had asked me, did you watch the ball drop? Right. And I was like, hell no. I was like, hell no. Literally what I told him was I went to bed early because in my mind, The sooner I went to bed, the sooner 2020 was over.
Right. What time did you go to bed?
Like 8. You honestly, bro, like these days in my old age, like the average time I'm in bed is like anywhere between 7 and 8:30 for the most part. But I'm up at like 3-4 o'clock in the morning, and that's when I like to get up and do my morning routine and get my day started.
So you're literally the earliest of birds.
I am the earliest of birds.
Yeah, but I get that. It's like you were just done. Like 2020 was so fucked that you were just all set with it. 8 o'clock at night.
But ironically, even though 2020 was obviously a shitstorm for most people, it was also one of my best years when it came to my personal growth. Because there was this kind of like this. There was this like overall theme of kind of exposure. And what I mean by that, everything kind of came to the surface, right? Like a lot of people were exposed on some level, right? Whether it was publicly, whether it's internally, we all learned a lot about ourselves and each other. And the optimist in me tells myself that the reason why we're kind of experiencing all this turmoil and tension is to kind of bring all that shit to the surface. And once we've been made aware of that, we can just kind of skim it off the top and kind of start fresh. And that's what I'm hoping.
Yeah, I mean that would be amazing. I do think that's a little idealistic.
Yeah, no, I agree.
But I hope that too, because and I would agree that like in terms of the world, 2020 was bad, but my son was born in 2020.
Yeah.
Like on a personal level, like it was a pretty, like a lot of crazy things happened, but
sure.
Still I agree. Like, but yeah. And then, so to just bring it back around.
Yep.
I mean, I would say that everything we just did is a testament to what this is.
Yeah.
Is just, we're just going to have conversations and we're going to try to stay on point, but there was no point to this.
No.
And sometimes there might never be a point to anything. And, and it's like, sort of like, we want you to come back week to week to see what's going to happen as we take this journey of figuring out what this thing is.
Yeah. So in the comments, please let us know what you would like to hear us talk about.
Right. And sometimes we will be dictating ourselves what we're talking about. So we'll get
as we should.
Right. And so maybe we'll do the theme months starting soon. Or
Why
maybe
not?
We won't.
Why not?
Who knows?
I mean, at the end of the day, like we were like I mentioned before, I want to treat this like a startup, right?
Yeah.
And the way that we determine value is based off of the audience's feedback, right? And so I think that's an idea that could really potentially turn into something, because what's better than a product or a service tailored by you? You know what I mean? Purchasing a product or service tailored by you, right? Because you know what you want.
Right. And we are here to facilitate that
and give you what you want.
So to wrap it up, my name is Dave.
And I am Gene.
And thank you for trying to help us figure out, what is this podcast?
What is this podcast?
See you next time.
Peace.